If you'll pray with me, please. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. When I was in high school, our marching band had something called Freshman Wake Up. At the end of our 2-week August band camp, members of the senior class, with permission from parents, would come into the bedrooms of freshman classmen a couple hours before sunrise. They would sneak in, and then the upperclassmen would loudly start playing their instruments as loud as they possibly could, startling the freshmen awake. So you could see tubas and trumpets and cymbals coming in to wake someone up. And then after the seniors woke up the freshmen, they took the freshmen out to Denny's in their pajamas, no less, for breakfast. Freshman Wake Up was intended to be a way to bond the upper and lower classmen. It was a way to pass that proverbial torch, a way to welcome new people into the fold. It was a way to bond musicians together in a community of shared experience. Well, when we hear all this stuff about circumcision, which I know makes some people uncomfortable to even say that word, there was a similar sense in this ancient community. The law the apostles and the believers in Acts are trying to uphold have the same intention as Freshman Wake Up. They did these things, these acts, to recreate experiences of a former generation in the life of a younger generation. Just as Freshman Wake Up was to help younger classmen feel connected to the history of these soon-to-be graduating seniors, many of the Jewish purification laws were created to help create a sense of community across many generations. Now, in an ideal world, these communal ritual acts are joy-filled for all people. It was difficult for the Jewish leaders to understand why these Gentiles would want to follow Jesus but not be circumcised like he was. Why would a person want to follow all the behaviors of Jesus except for what Jesus ate and what Jesus wore? It didn't make any sense. In an ideal world, Freshman Wake Up would have been a wonderful way for all band members to feel like they were part of the same club, that they had been vetted in the same ways. It would have been a way for people to have a common experience. But unfortunately, we do not live in an ideal world. We live in a broken world. And truthfully, Freshman Wake Up was a thing of my nightmares. What my bandmates did not know, what most of you probably don't know, is that I'm a childhood survivor of physical and sexual abuse by the hands of one of my extended family members. I'm not ashamed of my history, but I am cautious about how I share it because I know that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men have been harmed by someone they know within their homes. I limit how frequently I talk about this part of my history, of which I have no shame, because I don't want my story to trigger painful memories for someone else. But we need to own the reality that at least a quarter of us sitting in this sanctuary today have been physically harmed by someone we know. And if we can't name that reality here in God's house, then we can never expect to address it in the world, and we can never prepare our seniors to guard themselves from it as they venture off to college. Freshman Wake Up was a violent trigger for me. Instead of being an experience that united me with my marching band, the memory of Freshman Wake Up was one of those things of having a personal boundary crossed within my home, thanks to what seemed to most people as a harmless initiation rite. I had flashbacks for months, making my transition to high school far more precarious than it needed to be, and truthfully, that is one of the main reasons why I started smoking when I was in high school, because I was so traumatized by those flashbacks that came from something we thought would be harmless. I have no doubt that my bandmates, my band director, even my parents, thought that this initiation would be a fun way to bond me with someone else. I have no doubt that the early church thought that insisting on kosher and purity laws of new converts would be a way to help this fledgling Christian community bond together after Jesus' resurrection. But part of our challenge as a community of faith is to always keep in mind that we never really know the memories of our neighbor. We never really know what has happened in someone else's past, and we need to be mindful of how we behave so we do not trigger those memories in someone else's experience. What is safe for you might not be safe for your neighbor. What triggers you might not be what triggers your neighbor. The Gentiles, they carried a different past with them than the past of the Jewish disciples. And yet, these two communities who had very different experiences, who knew nothing of each other's past, had to come together as one family, to move forward as one people, even though they knew nothing of what had come before. Fortunately for us, we serve a God who understands that because of our personal histories, faith can be embodied with a certain amount of flexibility. God knew that the Gentiles would see this initiation rite of circumcision differently than the Jewish people who had grown up with this all of their lives. And that is why God came to Peter with a message that said, I know we've done this for a really long time, but it's okay for things to change. The traditions that shaped us in our past might not be the same traditions that will shape us in our future. And while that can feel strange and unsettling, it is going to be okay. Because our God is greater than our past. Our God is greater than our vision of the future. Our God is greater than our ability to understand what is happening in the hearts and minds of our neighbor. Sometimes, when God calls us to change, it can seem as if God is saying, you need to let go of part of who you are. When the early church was being told to welcome these Gentiles who didn't practice their purity laws that were so sacred to them, they felt as if God and Peter was saying, you need to give up on your heritage. But that's not what God was saying. What can feel like a loss to some might actually be a healing opportunity for others in ways we just cannot yet imagine. It would have been a loss for my bandmates my freshman year of high school to have had me not be there at breakfast at Denny's at freshman wake up. But truthfully, it would have been far more helpful for me, and I would have had many more positive memories of being with band if I had not been exposed to that terror of those flashbacks. If I had had a choice of how I entered that community, it would have been a joyful experience for me instead of an act of terror. It may have seemed like a loss of tradition for the Jewish Christians to relax their purity laws, but we don't know what was going on in the history of those Gentiles. But God did. And God gave Peter a vision, and Peter realized that being flexible about how the Gentiles entered the church was more helpful than upholding up a law just because this is what we've always done. Change is never easy. But when God calls us to change, it is always for our greatest good, even when in the moment it's happening, we can't imagine how. As we send our graduates off with our love and blessings, we do so knowing that they are entering into a season of change amid a lifetime of change of which we do not know the ending. In this moment, we may not be aware of all of the ways God is working for our healing, of all of the ways God is going to care for these two strong women. But the promise God made to them in their baptism, the promise God makes to us in our baptism, is that God is always working for us to have resurrection, even when we can't see it. God is always working for our healing, for our greatest good, for the betterment of all of us together in this community. Even if that means we have to change. Even if that means we have to loosen the reins on our heritage. Even if that means trying something we never expected.